நல்லூர் கந்தசுவாமி கோவில் யாழ் நகரில் இருந்து 2 கிலோமீட்டர் தூரத்தில் அமைந்துள்ள இக்கோவில் கிபி 948 ஆண்டு கட்டப்பட்டது. 16ஆம் நூற்றாண்டில் போர்த்துகேயரால் சேதமாக்கப்பட்ட ஆலயம் 18ஆம் நூற்றாண்டில் மீண்டும் கட்டப்பட்டு யாழ்ப்பாணத்திற்கான ஒரு அடையாளமாக விளங்குகின்றது. யாழ் நகரில் இருந்து 2 கிலோமீட்டர் தூரத்தில் அமைந்துள்ள இக்கோவில் கிபி 948 மேரிஸ் கெதீட்ரல் தேவாலயம் யாழ் நகரில் இருந்து 3 கிலோமீட்டர் தொலைவில் A9 வீதிக்கு அண்மையில் இத்தேவாலயம் அமைந்துள்ளது. 1789ஆம் ஆண்டில் இருந்து 1794ஆம் ஆண்டில் கட்டி முடிக்கப்பட்டது. நாகவிகாரை யாழ் நகரில் ஆரியகுளம் சந்தியில் அமைந்துள்ள இவ்விகாரை வடக்கில் பிரபல்யமான பௌத்த விகாரையாக காணப்படுகின்றது. தென்னிலங்கையிலிருந்து வரும் சுற்றுலா பயணிகள் அதிகம் செல்லும் விகாரையாகவும் இது அமைந்துள்ளது. யாழ்ப்பாணம் பெரிய பள்ளிவாசல் 1713ஆம் ஆண்டு கட்டப்பட்ட இப்பள்ளிவாசல் யாழ்ப்பாணத்தில் உள்ள மிக பழமை வாய்ந்த பள்ளிவாசலாக காணப்படுகின்றது. யாழ்ப்பாண நகரில் இருந்து 2 கிலோமீட்டர் தொலைவில் நாவல் வீதி கண்மையில் இப்பள்ளிவாசல் அமைந்துள்ளது. மாவட்டபுரம் கந்தசுவாமி கோவில் 8ஆம் நூற்றாண்டில் வாழ்ந்த சோழ நாட்டின் இளவரசி இங்கு வந்து முருகக் கடவுளை வழிபட்டு கீரிமலையில் நீராடிய போது குதிரைமுகன் நீங்கியது. இதனாலேயே இக்கிராமத்திற்கு மாவட்டபுரம் என பெயர் வந்ததாக சொல்லப்படுகின்றது. சங்கமித்தா விகாரை சங்கமித்து என்ற புத்த பிக்குணி வெள்ளரச மரக்கன்றினை இலங்கைக்கு கொண்டுவர அதனை தேவநம்பியதீசன் என்ற அரசன் பெற்றுக் கொண்டதாக சொல்லப்படும் ஜம்புகோளப்பட்டினத்தில் இவ்விகாரை அமைக்கப்பட்டுள்ளது. செல்வச்சந்நிதி முருகன் ஆலயம் யாழ் நகரில் இருந்து 22 கிலோமீட்டர் தொலைவில் இம்முருகன் ஆலயம் அமைந்துள்ளது. இங்கு பூஜை செய்பவர்கள் ஏனைய ஆலயங்களில் பூஜை செய்பவர்கள் போலல்லாமல் தமது வாயினை வெள்ளை துணியினால் கட்டியவாறு பூஜை செய்யும் கப்போராளிகளாவர். வல்லிபுர ஆழ்வார் கோவில் 13ஆம் நூற்றாண்டில் கட்டப்பட்ட இக்கோவில் அமைக்கப்பட்ட காலம் தமிழ் பௌத்தர்களும் இந்துக்களும் ஒன்றாக வாழ்ந்த காலமாகும். இவ்வாலயத்தின் மூலஸ்தானத்தில் சங்கு சக்கரம் வைத்து வழிபாடு மேற்கொள்ளப்படுகின்றது. பருத்தித்துறை நகரில் இருந்து கிழக்காக 6 கிலோமீட்டர் தொலைவில் இக்கோவில் அமைந்துள்ளது. நைனை நாகபூஷணியம்மன் ஆலயம் வடமாகாணத்தின் நாகர் வழிபாட்டின் கோவிலாக காணப்படும் இக்கோவில் 64 சக்தி பீடங்களில் ஒன்றாகவும் கருதப்படுகின்றது. ராமாயணத்தில் ராவணன் சக்தி வழிபாடு செய்த தலமாகவும் இது கருதப்படுகின்றது. நாகதீப விகாரை இயக்கர் நாகர் என்னும் இரு பிரிவுகளுக்கிடையே ஏற்பட்ட அரியணை பிணக்கை தீர்ப்பதற்கு நைனாதீவுக்கு வந்த புத்தர் அப்பிரச்சனையை சுமூகமாக தீர்க்க அவ்வரசர்கள் தமது அரியணையை புத்தருக்கு பரிசளித்தனர் என்ற வரலாறோடு தொடர்படும் இந்த நாகதீப விகாரைக்கு அதிகளவான பௌத்தர்கள் வருவது விளக்கமாகும். முருகண்டி பிள்ளையார் கோவில் யாழ் கண்டி வீதியில் முருகண்டி பிரதேசத்தில் அமைந்துள்ள கோவிலே இதுவாகும். பிரதான வீதியூடாக பயணம் செய்பவர்கள் தரித்து நின்று இளைப்பாறு செல்லும் இடமாகவும் இக்கோவில் காணப்படுகின்றது. பார்ப்பதற்கு சிறிய தோற்றத்துடன் காணப்படும் இக்கோவில் பிரித்தானியர் காலத்தில் கட்டப்பட்ட மிக நீண்ட வரலாற்றை கொண்ட ஆலயமாகும். புளியம்பொக்கணை நாகதம்பிரான் ஆலயம் மிக பழமை வாய்ந்த நாகர் வழிபாட்டு தலமான இங்கு பக்தர்கள் வெள்ளை நாகத்தை வழிபாடு செய்கின்றனர். அத்தோடு இங்கு வாழும் மக்கள் நாகத்துக்கு தீங்கு விளைவிக்க மாட்டார்கள் என்றும் நம்பப்படுகின்றது. வெற்றாப்பளை கண்ணகியம்மன் ஆலயம் முல்லைத்தீவு நகரில் இருந்து 3 கிலோமீட்டர் தொலைவில் அமைந்துள்ள இக்கோவில் தமிழ்நாட்டில் கண்ணகியம்மனுக்கு கோவில்கள் அமைந்த அதே கால பகுதியில் தோற்றம் பெற்றது. ஒட்டுசுட்டான் தான்தோன்று ஈஸ்வரம் முல்லைத்தீவு மாவட்டத்தில் ஒட்டுசுட்டான் பிரதேசத்திற்கு அண்மையில் அமைந்துள்ள மிக பிரபலமான சிவாலயம் இதுவாகும். இங்குள்ள சிவலிங்கம் தானாகவே தோன்றியதாகும். மடுமாதா தேவாலயம் கத்தோலிக்கர்களின் புனித தலமாக காணப்படும் இத்தலம் மூவின மக்களும் வழிபாடுகளில் ஈடுபடும் யாத்திரிக தலமாகவும் காணப்படுகின்றது. மன்னார் மாவட்டத்தில் எழில்மிகு காடுகளுக்கு நடுவில் அமைந்துள்ள 400 ஆண்டுகள் பழமை வாய்ந்த தேவாலயத்தில் ஜூலை மாதம் 2ஆம் தேதி தொடக்கம் ஆகஸ்ட் 15 வரை இங்கு திருவிழா சிறப்பாக நடைபெறும். திருக்கேதீஸ்வரம் மன்னார் மாவட்டத்தில் அமைந்துள்ள இவ்வாலயம் இலங்கையில் உள்ள பழமை வாய்ந்த 5 சிவாலயங்களில் ஒன்றாகவும் தேவார பாடல் பெற்ற தலமாகவும் காணப்படுகின்றது. 2000 ஆண்டுகளுக்கு முற்பட்ட கால வரலாற்றை கொண்டமைந்த இக்கோவில் 1570ஆம் ஆண்டு போர்த்துகேயரால் உடைக்கப்பட்டு ஒல்லாந்தர் காலத்தில் மீண்டும் கட்டப்பட்டது. மடுக்கந்த விகாரை மகிந்த தேரர் வெள்ளரசு மரக்கிளையை இங்கு வைத்து பூஜித்ததாகவும் 4ஆம் நூற்றாண்டில் புத்தரின் தந்தம் இவ்விகாரை அமைந்துள்ள இடத்தின் ஊடாக அனுராதபுரம் கொண்டு செல்லப்பட்டதாக வரலாறுகள் கூறுகின்றன. கல்வாரி தேவாலயம் வவுனியா மாவட்டம் வவுனியா நகரில் இருந்து 10 கிலோமீட்டர் தொலைவில் பெரிய கோமரசங்குளம் பகுதியில் உள்ள மலைக்குன்றில் இத்தேவாலயம் அமைந்துள்ளது. இயேசுபிரானின் பல்வேறுபட்ட திருப்பாடுகளை சித்தரிக்கும் சிற்பங்கள் இம்மலை உச்சியில் காணப்படுகின்றன. பழனிமலை முருகன் கோவில் வவுனியா மாவட்டம் சிதம்பரபுரம் கிராமத்தில் 200 மீட்டர் உயரமான மலை உச்சியில் அமைந்துள்ளதே இவ்வாலயமாகும். வடக்கில் காணப்படும் ஒரே ஒரு மலைக்கோவிலான இதற்கு செல்வதற்கு 400 படிக்கட்டுகளை கடந்து செல்ல வேண்டும். நெடுங்கேணி வெடுக்கு நாரிமலை மலைக்குன்றுகள், மலைச்சாரல்கள், குகைகள் நிறைந்த இப்பிரதேசம் இலங்கையின் ஆதிக்குடிகள் வாழ்ந்த பிரதேசமாக அடையாளப்படுத்தப்பட்டுள்ளது. வவுனியா மாவட்டம் வவுனியா வடக்கு பிரதேசத்தில் இம்மலை அமைந்துள்ளது. மண்டரிவு கடற்கரை மற்றும் கண்டல் தாப்
Hello and welcome to all of you joining from many parts of the world to this webinar organized by the Ontario Centre for Policy Research in Canada and London Initiative in United Kingdom. This event is being held in parallel to the United Nations Human Rights Council's 46th session in Geneva, Switzerland. My name is Honoré Ferdinand, and I'm honored to have been invited by the organizers to moderate today's event. Would like to open with some history. The Sri Lankan government forces experienced a 26-year armed insurgency with the ruthless Tamil terrorist LTTE. As a result, all Sri Lankans suffered for 26 years. The LTTE was responsible for using child soldiers, animals, and women to conduct and further their cause for a second Tamil homeland state similar to the one in Tamil Nadu in India. The Tenukai torture camp was used to torture all ethnicities as needed by the Indian-born leader Velupillai Prabhakaran. Many Tamil refugees escaped to Western world and some started a world movement of pro-LTT ideology to pressure the foreign policy of residing countries, attempting to erase the history of suffering of Sinhalese, Muslims, and other ethnicities at the hands of LT terrorists. The 26-year armed insurgency also distanced two generations from interacting, playing, and socializing with one another in the north and the east, and also being subject to LTT's terrorist brainwashing. The younger generation lost the opportunity to play and interact with one another, and instead was shown the military facade of the insurgency instead of the social harmony of ethnicities enjoyed by Tamils living in other parts of Sri Lanka. This, no doubt, have instilled fear and oppression by the LTTE in the younger generation back then in the north and east. Now, those younger generation who have fled to as refugees have grown up in many parts of the world, having experienced only one side of the insurgency, seems to have created a more pro-LTT movements to pressure their own residing countries to highlight LTT's views. A UNHCR resolution against Sri Lanka is expected to be tabled, and it is speculated that Sri Lanka will call for a vote. Sri Lanka rejected the High Commissioner's report, and since it is not reflecting the facts and real aspirations of Sri Lankans, this webinar explores whether the UNHRC resolution is infringing the sovereignty of Sri Lanka. We are joined by 7 great personalities, subject matter experts, to provide their opinion in presenting their views. The format of the webinar is we will allow each presenter to present for about 10 minutes, and after all 7 presentations are made, we'll open the floor for questions and answers. Without further ado, may I please welcome our first presenter today, Mr. Hasaka Ratnamalala from Winnipeg, Canada. Mr. Ratnamalala is a practicing lawyer in the province of Manitoba in Canada. He is a graduate from Sri Lanka Law College and had his legal education in Faculty of Law at the University of Manitoba. He holds a Bachelor of Arts degree from University Sri Jagadnarpura in Sri Lanka. His studies were focused in political science, economics, and sociology. Please welcome Mr. Ratnamalala.
Good morning, Anura. Good morning, other panelists. I thank the organizers for organizing this timely webinar, approaching another unjustifiable UNHRC resolution against Sri Lanka. My duty today is to set the stage for discussion. The question is, will UNHRC resolution infringe the sovereignty of Sri Lanka? To start the discussion, we have to understand what is sovereignty means. Simply, the sovereignty is the supreme authority within a territory. If you take a state, sovereignty is assigned to a person, body, or institution that has the ultimate authority over the other people in order to establish a law or change an existing law. In political theory, sovereignty is a substantive term designating supreme legitimate authority over some polity. The Encyclopedia Britannica described the sovereignty as the ultimate overseer or authority in the decision-making process of the state and in the maintenance of the order. Let's see where sovereignty stands within Sri Lanka. In Sri Lankan Constitution, on paragraph 1, Sri Lanka is a free, sovereign, independent, and democratic socialist republic. And in paragraph 3, the Republic of Sri Lanka sovereignty is in the people and is inalienable. Sovereignty includes the powers of government, fundamental rights, and the franchise. And the paragraph 4 paragraph 4 of the Sri Lankan Constitution, the sovereignty of the people shall be exercised and enjoyed in the following manner. Legislative power of the people shall be exercised by the parliament. Executive power of the people shall be executed by the president of the republic. And the judicial power of the people shall be exercised through courts, tribunal, and institutions created and established by the parliament. The fundamental rights respected, secured, and advanced by all organs of the government. Abridged, without restricted or denied. The franchise shall be exercisable at the election of president and the members of parliament. So nowhere in Sri Lankan Constitution it says Sri Lanka's sovereignty has been delegated to United Nations or any of its organizations. Not only Sri Lanka, but also any of those so-called core group countries against Sri Lanka are also sovereign countries, and their sovereignty is vested within some source in or outside the country. As an example, Canada and United Kingdom, the sovereignty is within the king and the parliament. In Germany, sovereignty is within the basic law or within the constitution. Sovereignty in Republic of Macedonia derives from the citizens and belongs to the citizens. Republic of Malawi derives from the people. So what is meant by infringement of sovereignty? That is some outside power taking over the role of ultimate overseer or authority and dominate and colonize. Will these core group countries will allow an outside source to take over the role of the ultimate overseer or authority of their particular countries? I don't think so. So then why these countries want UNHRC to infringe Sri Lanka's sovereignty? I will let the other panelists answer that question. Then the question is, will the UN allows its organizations to infringe sovereignty of other nations? Let's see how UN Charter supports the sovereignty of independent nations. Article 2, the organization and its members, in pursuit of purposes stated in Article 1, shall act in accordance with the following principles. Principle 1, the organization is based on the principle of sovereign equality of all its members. Sovereign equality. What does this mean? Sovereign equality is the principle that states all states are equal before the international law. And domestic behavior towards citizens and residents is no business to other states. Then what UNHRC is doing in Sri Lanka? In 2009, with the approval of people of Sri Lanka, armed forces of Sri Lanka disarmed and wiped out a terrorist group named Liberation Tigers of Tamil Eelam, which was forcefully holding Sri Lanka's land and indiscriminately killing thousands of Sri Lankan citizens. By disarming LTTE, Sri Lanka rescued over 300,000 Sri Lankan citizens and liberated entire north and eastern provinces in Sri Lanka from LTTE. This is clearly domestic in nature. No other country has any business with Sri Lanka with it. No other country has any business with it. Sri Lanka has the clear right to defend its territory and its people. But in UNHRC, by its 30/1 resolution, grossly infringed Sri Lanka's sovereignty by requesting to establish a judicial mechanism with a special council and the participation of Commonwealth and other foreign judges, defense lawyers, and authorized prosecutors and investigators. And also it requested take constitutional measures for devolved political settlement. These resolutions are purely beyond the mandate of UNHRC, which was incorporated with the help of politicians without any endorsement of Sri Lankan Parliament or Cabinet of Ministers, where constitutional pillars of the sovereign powers of Sri Lankan people exist. Furthermore, the forthcoming resolution suggesting further infringement of Sri Lanka's sovereignty. I'm glad the current Sri Lankan government withdrew co-sponsorship of resolution for of 13-1 and take a stand in protecting the sovereignty of Sri Lanka. And now I leave it to my other speakers to carry on. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Ratnamalala, for that presentation. Next, I would like to invite Ms. Jehan Hamid from Colombo, Sri Lanka. Ms. Hamid is a Colombo-based activist with a passion for reconciliation and women's affairs. Ms. Hamid is an alumnus of University of Colombo, where she graduated from with master's degree in conflict resolution. I'd like to invite Ms. Hamid.
Much. Thank you to the panelists. Good evening to all. I'm going to discuss on the issue of Muslim funeral rights, which is highlighted under the Section 8 of the proposed resolution. I think it's fair for me to say I'm qualified enough to comment on this issue, being a Muslim living in Sri Lanka all my life. I will explore the difference between the opinion projected in the international media and international human rights forums and the ground reality of we Muslims experience day in, day out here in Sri Lanka. The draft resolution mentions about the prevailing marginalization and of discrimination against the Muslim community. This statement portrays a gloomy picture conveying the false message that Muslims are being harassed in Sri Lanka and we don't have the opportunity to live and go about doing our business freely. I have to say, nothing can be far from the truth. If you have been to Sri Lanka, you would know the Muslim community is an inseparable thread entwinched into the tapestry of the multi-ethnic Sri Lankan community. Muslims here in Sri Lanka play a vital role in the business sector, from running from small grocery shops to running into major export businesses. Also, you will meet, if you come to Sri Lanka, you will meet all sorts of professionals from the Muslim community. You will see doctors, teachers, lawyers, engineers, artists, you name it. We have people from all sort of professional segments. Well, if we are marginalized, would you expect two justice ministers of two recent governments, including the current one, to be famous Muslim politicians in Sri Lanka? As you must see that our mosques, Buddhist temples, Hindu kovils, and churches are built close by each other, and every Sri Lankan city tells us the story of this harmonious existence. Also, I want to highlight something very important that is in the West. You all talk about a phenomenon called Islamophobia, where the Muslims are seen as the source of terrorism. Therefore, the Western scholars who draft resolutions like the one under the current discussion assume that the same stereotype is happening in Sri Lanka. I think we have a symbolic relationship. We Muslims have a symbolic relationship historically with the Sinhalese people here in Sri Lanka, and we have lived in absolute harmony with the Tamil, Sinhalese, and Muslims in Sri Lanka. For instance, the Sinhalese and Tamil farmers sell their produce to the Muslim businessmen, and the Muslim women buy their jewelry from the Tamil goldsmiths and go to Sinhalese beauticians. Most of us are privileged. Most of the Muslims here are very privileged to be the strongest link in this chain, as we can speak all three languages. Most of us speak very fluently, like the Tamil, Sinhalese, and English. Also, I must say the coronavirus pandemic has been a difficult time for everyone all over the world. We are all scared if our loved ones will crumble to the deadly virus or someone will get sick. I remember watching the news about the thousands of daily coronavirus deaths happening in countries like Italy, France, Spain at the peak of the pandemic times. I never imagined myself talking critically about a government measure taken to control the spread of the virus because we knew we were all in it together and determined to do everything possible to prevent the spread of the pandemic. We in Sri Lanka, we praised our government for doing a fantastic job in curbing the COVID-19 pandemic than most developed countries. When other countries kept their airports open, Sri Lanka closed them early. When others talked about self-quarantine, Sri Lanka opened up separate quarantine centers. The government policy was to hit hard and hit early. I think this policy left room for some of the opportunists to manipulate some of us. In Islamic law and in Muslim culture, burying the dead in the ground is regarded as the correct way of respecting the dead bodies, while cremating is prohibited because it is considered a violation of the dignity of the human body. We consider it's a violation among us, the Muslims. What's more, the burial of a deceased person is a collective obligation for all of us Muslims, for the Muslim community. This obligation consists of our own rituals, the rituals of washing the dead bodies, putting the coffin and shredding the body with pieces of clothes, and finally, Salat al-Janaza, a funeral prayer. Nevertheless, the protection of life is the first of the 5 ultimate objectives of Islamic law, Makad al-Sharia, and therefore overrides any other Islamic obligation for us. Accordingly, if Sri Lanka's health authority concluded that a particular Islamic funeral ritual could lead to infection spreading or putting others' lives at risk, then that practice could be modified. If health authorities conclude that normal ghusl, which includes scrubbing the deceased person's dead body, could lead to infection, then merely pouring or just spraying water onto the body is sufficient enough. This Islamic thinking was confirmed by the Jordanian Iftar board recently, typifying the pragmatic and practical Islamic approach to funeral rituals. However, in my understanding, our government, in its early effort to curb the pandemic, swiftly and efficiently, firm decision at the very first instance not to allow bury any dead infected with COVID-19. The government must have had their reasons, panic, lack of scientific evidence of the real effect. But I'm glad now, as a Muslim, that it's been resolved by allowing the burials to happen while ensuring that such practice is not a danger to whoever is carrying out the rituals and for the rest of the Sri Lankans. The government has now issued a fresh gazette enabling both burial and cremation of COVID victims subjected to certain guidelines. There were some hiccups initially due to the insistence that burials should be allowed only in the Isle of Iranikiu in the Gulf of Mannar. Later on, alternative spots were gradually found in Otumavadi, in Batkaloa district, and bodies of Muslim COVID victims are now buried and according to our religious rights, and we Muslims are breathing very peacefully and very happily, and we are relieved that finally it is done for us. Amnesty International and several other human rights organizations welcome this positive decision by the government, including Sheikh Dr. Mohammed bin Abdul Karim bin Isa, Secretary General of the Muslim World League. And we Muslims in Sri Lanka strongly believe the UN Human Rights Council should too follow suit. Now there is no point in talking about mandating cremations for those deceased from COVID-19, preventing Muslim religious rights, because now it is a thing of the past. We Sri Lankan Muslims can see why it happened, and the Sri Lankan government also understood why it was difficult for us Muslims. 11 out of the 47, or roughly 1/4 of the UNHRC member states have an Islamic majority. In my opinion, that the core group is exploiting this issue. So the core group altered the draft resolutions wording to include the mandatory cremation of Muslims issue. There is no doubt that the objective was to woo Islamic majority countries into voting for the resolution or wean them from refraining from opposing to it. So I think very strongly that the Human Rights Council, the UN Human Rights Council, should stop seeing crocodiles in the teacup and remove Section 8 altogether from the resolution. I'm sure any Sri Lankan Muslim brother or sister listening to me will agree with me when I say it's time to stop giving ammunition to outsiders to threaten the peace prevailing in our motherland. Thanks again for the opportunity. I'll be here to take questions during the Q&A. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ms. Hamid, for that great presentation. You raised the currently discussed topic and you have addressed them eloquently. We look forward to the question period. There are many questions coming, and I'm going to line them up for the question period. Thank you. Next, we have Mr. Jayaraj Palihawardena from London, United Kingdom. Mr. Palihawardena is a graduate of law and practicing solicitor in a reputed law firm in United Kingdom. He is a founder of London Initiative, a public policy think tank in United Kingdom. He is directly involved in organizing activities and attending UN Human Rights Council sessions since 2017. In 2017, for the first time, with this intervention, they opposed to Tamil separatism went to the Human Rights Council. This is a new phenomenon in the history of Sri Lanka and the Human Rights Council. Mr. Palihavardena's experience range from being a lawyer, activist in a non-governmental organization, as well as his most recent role working in International Human Rights Council as an ambassador to the United Kingdom. Please welcome Mr. Palihavardena.
Thank you, Anura. As our previous speaker addressed clearly, one of the operating paragraphs of the draft resolution, actually the paragraph 8, she clearly stated the core group's attempt to use the issue of burial of COVID deaths as a weapon to attract more votes to get the resolution get through. I'm going to analyze further 2 paragraphs to show why the member countries should reject the resolution. Before that, first, I would like to address the current situation of the resolution before the Human Rights Council. As we all know, the Human Rights Council, Human Rights Chief High Commissioner released a report to the public on the 9th February, a fortnight before the Human Rights Council sessions began. Not only that, further, her office published the report through a media campaign different to many other previous occasions. Yes, we saw the report severely criticized the current Sri Lankan government and urged the member states of the council to adopt drastic measures on Sri Lanka. Thereafter, the resolution on Sri Lanka was submitted to the Human Rights Council. It was presented by the United Kingdom with the co-sponsorship of Canada, Germany, Malawi, Montenegro, and North Macedonia as the core group on Sri Lanka. It should be taken up for voting on 22nd or 23rd of March. After subletting the initial draft, the initial text went into several changes during the informal meetings before it was tabled formally, as the final version was submitted to the council on the 12th of March. The final resolution has 4 pages and worded to show and to give an impression that it has been presenting with the full participation of Sri Lanka, but the real picture is completely different. However, it is now clearly visible that the fact that none of the changes offered by the Sri Lanka has been accepted during the informal consultations. Most regrettably, the wording has been tightened to reflect more adverse effect on Sri Lanka. Now it is down to member countries to decide to let it go or not. It is now open to Sri Lanka as well. Sri Lanka so far has failed to solo reverse the provisions in the resolution. Now it's time for Sri Lanka to seek friendly countries to support to get a vote against the resolution. This will definitely create a division within the member countries in Human Rights Council. Foreign Minister Dinesh Gunawardena, Foreign Secretary Rear Admiral Jayanath Kolambage, in a series of media interviews, expressed that there are positive signs in favor of Sri Lanka. However, there is a possibility that majority of the 47 member countries would vote for Sri Lanka. That means against Sri Lanka. Also said that a few, including India, are expected to abstain the vote. There are countries, in principle, do not support country-specific resolutions. Many among member states of Human Rights Council believe country-specific resolutions are infringing state sovereignty. As we all aware, the Human Rights Council and OHCHR are expected to offer friendship, educate and empower individuals and assist states in upholding human rights. Because of these bodies' intergovernmental nature, they are expected to function and provide their services with high level of objectivity. Unfortunately, we do not see that objectivity in this resolution. Instead, we identify a deplorable attempt to use this resolution as an instrument to coercively drive a political agenda that is unhealthy for current Sri Lankan reconciliation process. Not only that, I see this resolution surpasses the Human Rights Council's mandate to work as an advisory body on human rights and invade a sovereign nation's rights and responsibilities. Only looking at the few paragraphs alone, this deplorable attempt is visible. Operating paragraph 6 is to create a dedicated establishment at the Office of High Commissioner for Human Rights to collect and preserve evidence against Sri Lanka. It is revealed that to establish this body will cost an estimate $2 million US. This OHCHR-led evidence preservation mechanism for Sri Lanka would be the first of its kind. Similar mechanisms included in the International Impartial Independent Mechanism, IIM, for Syria and Myanmar, and the OHCHR's DRPK accountability project established for North Korea. Not just included as a part of it, but not a fully implemented as a separate mechanism. The mechanism would be aimed at establishing a central information evidence repository which access to information and testimony to develop state uh, strategies for future trials and accountability processes. If established, the mechanism expected to support judicial proceedings in other UN member states with jurisdiction to prosecute extraterritorial breaches of international law, bringing Sri Lankan officials one step closer to bring indicted and tried overseas. This is a very dangerous move, in fact. In real terms, if the resolution is adopted, member countries would be able to compile evidence on future human rights violations, so they may institute legal proceedings in their own countries where there is competent jurisdiction. Thereby, legal action which should normally be dealt with domestically in the relevant issues arose within Sri Lanka, could now give way for judicial redress processes to be sent in motion in a third country, which run counter to the commitment of the sovereignty of Sri Lanka. In other words, 6 countries bringing up a resolution against another sovereign nation to empower some other countries to act against that one country, which is an unprecedented move and, in fact, is a bad precedence. We believe this reflects profound disorientation from the Human Rights Council in identifying its role in assessing countries to uphold human rights. We see this as their role change from candid and friendly advisor, as it should be, to a biased policeman. While the council can advocate a country to execute different mutually agreed actions that will uphold human rights, its role is never to work as an instrument of executing actions such as proposed creation of repository of evidence. Besides, it has no mandate to rally countries against each other, creating hostile diplomatic relations. Again, when we're looking at the other paragraph 7 of the resolution, it shows the pinnacle of the Council's prejudice against Sri Lanka. This part resonates with the delusional idea similar to the theme discussed in a sci-fi movie, Minority Report. In that movie, a special police unit is able to arrest murderers before they commit their crimes. The council plays the role of a fortune teller when the council comments on this resolution. This is the comment: a clear early warning sign of a deteriorating situation of human rights that risks the recurrence of policies and practices that gave rise to the grave violations of the past. The council exposes itself to show that this prejudice is mainly aimed at the current government when it mentioned restrictions on media freedom and shrink in democratic space that threaten to reverse the limited but important gains made in recent years. It is ironic that the council praises the past government on media freedom and protecting democracy when they banned social media. The former government banned the social media use repetitively and failed to hold the democratic provincial council elections for years. It is in its own resolution 34/8, the Human Rights Council 34/8, the Human Rights Council discusses the negative effect of the terrorism on human rights. Any responsible government must take actions against terrorism, including preventing glorifying terrorism within its territory. The Council's attempt to define such act as Tamil and Muslims marginalization is disgraceful. Not only that, attempting to reinforce the separatist rhetoric that the war against terrorism was a civil war between Tamils and Sinhalese. These are the reasons to show that this proposed resolution does not have a genuine intention of assisting Sri Lanka in the promotion and protection of human rights or in achieving peace and reconciliation. Sri Lanka has enjoyed peace and development free from the threat of terrorism for nearly 2 years. This resolution fails to acknowledge this reality but engages a barrage of accusations to vilify Sri Lanka in the eyes of the rest of the world. The scandalous resolution like this, one encroaching into an independent nation's sovereignty, sets unprecedented, unacceptable precedents for an intergovernmental body that should be impartial in its operational behavior. Therefore, we can see that the proposed resolution, especially the operating paragraph 6, also has a clear interference into the internal affairs of the Sri Lanka and exceeded the mandate of the OHCHR, Human Rights Council, not there to provoke one country against other. We have already seen during the debate on Sri Lanka's report of the commissioner how countries are divided. Therefore, it is important the Human Rights Council and the OHCHR will strictly follow impartiality, objectivity, non-selectivity, and non-politicization principles, respect the sovereignty and political independence of all nations, respect the efforts of the nations for protection and promotion of human rights, advocate constructive dialogue and cooperation, and abandon the practice of interfering in the internal affairs of other countries and exerting political pressure. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Palivarna, for that informative presentation. You highlighted rightfully the role United Nations Human Rights Council should play, instead of being and rightfully highlighted how futuristic it seems with regard to Minority Report's movie. So more questions are flowing through. Unfortunately, I will keep them until we come to the question and answer period. Next, I would like to invite Dr. Hevage. Dr. Hevage is a senior policy analyst with the Ontario Centre for Policy Research. He obtained his PhD from the Laurentian University in Canada. He is also an adjunct professor and research fellow of the International Centre for Interdisciplinary Research in Law at the Laurentian University of Canada. Please welcome Dr. Hevage.
Thank you very much, Aruna. So I think you can hear me, right?
Yes.
Okay. Today we are going to discuss very important question: undermining UNHRC principles is resolution infringing sovereignty of Sri Lanka. So let's talk about the sovereignty. So my friend Hasaka indicated that few elements, but when you compare to the United Nations Charter, Article 2.1 clearly states sovereign equality. In addition to that, United Nations Charter, Article 2.4 and 7, UN Charter also established very strong principles of the sovereignty. And it says supreme authority within territory, the plenitude of the internal jurisdiction, and the immunity from other own jurisdiction. That is the most important United Nations principle. Impunity from other states' own jurisdiction and their freedom from other states' intervention of their territory. So this is coming directly from United Nations Charter. Now, when you look at the further and international norm, there are very established principles for the sovereignty. Supreme authority within territory or ultimate power within the territory is called that as a sovereignty. That is a very important fact. In addition to that, the additional concept of the sovereignty is stating absolute independence, and there is no anybody can interfere. That is an absolute independence or freedom of its captures, but it at the stake in internal sovereignty. Now, then every country has a sovereignty rights. Then Sri Lanka also enjoying sovereignty rights. That is called plenary territorial and personal jurisdiction within the one territorial boundaries. The presumption of legality is one of the sovereignty acts. Then other important element here, constitutional and organizational autonomy and the protection of one's domain rivers. So this is the very, very important matter. So we need to highlight today. Constitutional and organizational autonomy is established through the United Nations Charter, and that is also one of the declaration, 1970 Friendly Relation Declaration. Now, let me analyze this situation with the principles, how this resolution is infringing sovereignty of Sri Lanka. We know that the United Nations Secretary General appoint the panel of experts. That panel of expert report has a validity. So we have serious issues with the validity of the report in question. Then after that, based on this report, and they have created the OISL report. So which is investigation on Sri Lanka. This report is clearly stated that para 22 has stated POE, panel of expert report, utilized as a key source of information. Now what happened was that we have an issue with the validity of the report in question, that this validity of the question has been transferred to the OSL report. After that, recently that the commissioner, Madam Bachelet from Chile, and commissioner tabled the report on Sri Lanka. Then what happened? This is based on this OISL report, that the 46th session, that report also, this validity of this document in question has been automatically transferred to the 46th session of the report. Then what happened? Then based on that report, core group went there and passed the draft the resolution 46, and then so this is the final version I have obtained from the United Nations database. So then what happened is the validity of this report in the question has been transferred here. So now you can see how this situation, whole situation is evolved. There is no validity of that report. At the beginning, there is no validity of the resolution 46, what they are going to take against Sri Lanka. In addition to that, my friend Rich will explain the more details about the validity of this question. Now, I want to consider for this stage for the operative paragraph 1, but actually there is a preamble paragraph about 15 paragraph, but I'm not going to talk about them. I will emphasize here on the operative paragraph. Operative paragraph number 1, it says, welcome the oral update presented by the High Commissioner. But that the report is derived from unvalidity. We can validate that the information and bias and pre-reduced information, and therefore conclusion derived from the wrong facts and procedures. And we totally rejected that report. But the operative paragraph, they want to ask us to welcome and Sri Lanka to welcome this report. It is a violation of the independent sovereignty and autonomy. And then we go to the operative paragraph 2. Operative paragraph 2 is one of the biggest problem for me here, recommendation of the special procedure. What is the special procedure? And do they want to sign Sri Lanka to blank check? It is just like, to me, Sri Lankan government, they want to keep us in the blank check in their whole hand, and to give they can control our autonomy. They want to control our autonomy, and they want to keep that in the hand. So therefore, we should reject that the operative paragraph 2. Let's look at the paragraph 3. I'm not going to talk about it. So that's what it is in the green. It is much okay for me. So then we look at the paragraph 4, and it says comprehensive accountability for the liberation tigers of Tamil Eelam, for the members of the liberation tigers of Tamil Eelam. This is a totally unacceptable situation. Sovereign nation of the Sri Lanka, President has clearly pardoned for the Tamil tigers, and we rehabilitated 13,000 cadre, and we will put them back to the society, and we will hand over them to the mothers and the parents. We are not going back anyhow. Sri Lankan government take this Tamil youth back to the court. That is a period. So we have done. So this is the accountability process we have successfully completed. But the Human Rights Commission, for this resolution, they want to interfere for the internal jurisdiction matters. So let's look at the paragraph number 5. Paragraph number 5 is one of the biggest problem here. It says one of the word gross violation and serious violation. Then they are in prejudice, and anywhere in the world, any government or any competent jurisdiction has been not determined Sri Lankan government or forces has violated human rights law or international humanitarian law. So this word is including gross violation and serious. They are prejudiced and they have predetermined Sri Lankan government and armed forces has violated the law. It is a prejudice opinion. In my opinion, it is a daylight robbery. It is a daylight robbery co-group in London and Geneva. So let's go to the paragraph 6. Paragraph 6, my friend Jairaj clearly explained that how is going to interfere with the sovereignty, and therefore I'm not going to discuss much. And paragraph 7 also, Solicitor Jairaj explained how it is going to interfere for the sovereignty because of those are internal matters. So those are the wordings over there: restriction of the media freedom and shrinking democratic space, intimidation of the civil society, and those are allegations. And those things we don't need a United Nations Human Rights Council or co-group and for the United Kingdom or some other people to come and sort out this problem. And so we have our mechanism. We can resolve our domestic issue. This is the clearly interfering domestic matters and sovereignty of Sri Lanka. That is also another daylight robbery done by this London and Geneva group. So when we look at the paragraph 8, my previous speaker at Jehana clearly explained that why that Muslim burial issue has been resolved. So because at the beginning, Sri Lankan government, we didn't have a technical issue because major issue is here, and our water table in Sri Lanka 2.5 meters below in the most part of the country. There was a suspicion that the leaching items and body and can be contaminated with the groundwater. So therefore, they have done extensive research, and this is the coronavirus is new. So therefore, it has been later on determined. Technical committee has been established that paragraph is that matter is resolved. However, this paragraph is still in the resolution. So what does it mean? They want to interfere and they want to divide the community, and so this is what the core group is going to do, and it is a daylight robbery. And when you look at the operation paragraph, so this is the most important thing I want to highlight. It says paragraph 9 is a if warranted and the allege, and it will also have a long standing. So then this paragraph 9 is a contradicting with the operating paragraph 6 and paragraph 9. Paragraph 6 is same, and the gross violation and gross violation or serious violation. Now they are saying that alleged crime. So what does it mean? And that's meaning left hand doesn't know what right hand is doing. Even this is the worst resolution I have seen in my life throughout the United Nations Human Rights Council. And so it is clearly indicated that each and everybody is trying to do what they want, and there is no consistency, there is no protection of the human rights. It is a totally biased and prejudice the resolution. Then we look at the operative paragraph 10 and the prevention of the terrorism act. So they want to discuss. It is concluded that then legal autonomy and sovereign autonomy is the constitutional autonomy. It's very important for the country. And Sri Lanka has the sole right to determine what act they have to pass according to the whatever information is available to them and best of the nation. This is a different, clearly interfere in the domestic legal system. That is the infringing sovereignty of Sri Lanka. Then we look at the paragraph 14 and 15, and special it says here. So those are the few words. So we need to consider here. Special procedure of the Human Rights Council. Then paragraph 15 is saying, and relevant special procedure of the mandate. So what does it mean? That the special procedure is there. I clearly challenge that. special procedure has been not disclosed, so therefore we cannot agree. Then other is that relevant special procedure. So there are special procedures are there. In addition to that, there are multiple other procedures also included in this resolution. This is a totally disgrace, and this is how Human Rights Council is going to interfere for Sri Lanka. And this is clearly say that one lack of clarity of this. What is the special procedure? It's meaning it is a clearly infringing sovereignty of the Sri Lanka. So this is the last paragraph. But actually, there are some good things also coming in this paragraph. So when you look at the last paragraph, it is that total tone what they want to do at the paragraph 6 and 7, and so they have cleared here. Both be discussed in the context of the interactive dialogue. That's what the Sri Lankan government wants. That's what the people of Sri Lanka want. We want to have an interactive dialogue with the Human Rights Council and other human rights defenders. Then that is the most important thing. Not because of the go and introduce the undermine judicial procedures in Sri Lanka or give us to how to govern the country. It's not the duty and mandate of the Human Rights Council. We want to have a clear interactive dialogue, so which is really good. But this is totally disarray with all the paragraphs they have written. So it's meaning that left hand doesn't know what right hand doing, because each and every important interested parties is trying to influence the United Nations Human Rights Council on the political manner. So therefore, we should reject. But finally, I want to consider for the very important issue for the preamble paragraph number 7. It is on the preamble section. And preamble section, it says it has to be at it mentioned Northern Provincial Council and the 13th Amendment and Constitution of the Sri Lanka. Human Rights Council has no whatsoever authority to come and say to what we should do, what we should not do. It has to be determined by the Parliament. And 13th Amendment, if we want to people, they ask the amendment, so we can continue. And if they have some modification, so we can continue. Human Rights Council doesn't have any kind of authority to interfere sovereign nations of the Sri Lanka. In addition to that, this is the country-specific resolution. In addition to that, they have added the Northern Provincial Council, that the country-specific resolution further down into the state level. So it is a totally disgrace, and we will not agree for any one of them. So then we know that UNHRC, not a court or tribunal or adjudicative body, has no authority to enforce or sanction. And UNHRC resolution 4020, but we don't know it is 20, but it's so that's why I put them into in bracket, against the Sri Lanka, clearly, very clearly undermine UN Charter and the UNHRC principle. In addition to that, UNHRC resolution directly infringe sovereign rights, constitutional and organizational autonomy of Sri Lanka. We request core group to repeal operative paragraph 1, 2, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 12, 14, and 15, or all together, withdraw all together. And UN resolution undermines UNHRC principle. Now, then finally, I would like to say, resolution is definitely infringing on sovereignty of Sri Lanka. And it must be rejected. It must be rejected. And then we request all 47 member states not to support country-specific resolution as well as resolution against the Sri Lanka. Thank you very much. And so this is my presentation. And I know that you have a lot of questions, but I can answer this question for later on at the question and answer. Thank you very much. Thanks.
Thank you, Dr. Hevage, for that great analysis from the start of the panel of expert report right down to different resolutions. And now, based on that, granular recommendations by this council to go even to the changing of the constitution, and as well as going down to Northern Council political matters. So looking forward for the question and answer period to get to the concerns of our listeners joining from all over the world. Next presenter we have is Mr. Daya Gamage from California in the United States. Mr. Gamage had a 25-year career at the United States Department of State, initially as a public affairs specialist, and the final 15 years as a Foreign Service National Political Specialist. Daya worked in the U.S. diplomatic mission in Sri Lanka during two southern youth insurrections. He worked as an investigative analyst, keen observer, and political interpreter of the separatist Elam War launched by the Tamil Tigers LTTE. During the volatile atmosphere in Sri Lanka, Mr. Gamage assisted Washington understand the ever-changing socio-political climate of Sri Lanka, which coincided with U.S. national interest. Please welcome Mr. Gamage.
Friends, greetings to those who are listening. I am highlighting an issue that the United Nations and the Western nations ignored since the end of the Elam War in 2009. In aiding and abetting pro-separatist activists within the Tamil diaspora, threatening the sovereignty of Sri Lanka. Obviously, terrorist separatist LTTE is not dead. Militarily, it was defeated within Sri Lanka in 2009. The outfit's military leaders are no more, but its political separatist advocates are well alive within the global Tamil diaspora. These advocates are the persons who collaborated with the LTT leadership, especially as the close advisors and enablers, enabling its leader Prabhakaran to unleash a lethal terrorism within the territory of Sri Lanka and played a vital supportive role to advocate the separatist agenda while assisting effectively to globally raise funds to procure lethal weapons, to sustain terrorism, abetting LTTE to commit blatant human rights of the Tamil people, and ethnic cleansing of Muslims and Sinhalese, which is in fact a genocide. The exercise of these advocates in the legal interpretation of the document that declare the Tamil Tigers as foreign terrorist organization by the United States Department of State is providing material support to a proscribed terrorist organization. The 2010 U.S. Supreme Court unanimous decision reiterated that those who give even vocal support to a proscribed terrorist outfit are none other than providing material support, which is prohibited under the U.S. and international law. Lord Nesby of the United Kingdom most recently questioned as to why Adel Balasingham, who prepared young Tamil youth for combat within the ranks of the LTT, is not prosecuted as she had effectively acted violating international humanitarian law that UNHRC is pledged to uphold. Those who collaborated with LTT terrorism are the very persons who are now advocating human rights for the Tamil people. While domiciled in the countries such as the United States, Canada, United Kingdom, and some other 32 countries that have proscribed the outfit as a terrorist organization, while the government of Sri Lanka is being accused of human rights and rule of law violations in UNHRC, those who effectively provided material support. Material means vocal advocacy associated in raising funds for the procurement of lethal weapons for the LTT to engage in terrorism are freely domiciled in the same countries that declare the LTT outfit a terrorist movement. And these countries that advocate human rights and anti-terrorism turn a blind eye, allowing those violators of the UN Charter to go scot-free. Let's see how the UNHRC has ignored the UN Charter. provisions that make these material supporters culpability. International humanitarian law, which is the basis of the UN Charter, is applicable to non-state actors such as the LTT and very much applicable to those who are directly associated with such terror movements. The war crimes committed by the LTT very well applicable under the IHL, International Humanitarian Law, and so are the providers of material support such as Adele Balasingham living in the UK, Vishwanathan Rudrakumaran living in the United States, and many others, many other Tiger remnants who involvement with the Tiger terror and violation of the IHL are well documented. The accepted belief was, and even now, that if the state actor, which is the legitimate administration of a country, in an internal conflict is a signatory to the international covenants of humanitarian law, that state actor needs to abide by the provisions ratified by the United Nations, and that any violation of the international humanitarian law, the state actor bears culpability. In contrast, in a situation in which an armed non-state actor
Thank you there for your presentation. Next, we introduce Mr. R.P. Udavatta, Rish Udavatta, from London, United Kingdom. After working for the corporate sector for many years,
Anurag, sorry for that interruption. I have not finished really.
I'm so sorry.
Okay.
But,
okay, I'm going on.
Thank you.
In contrast, in a situation in which an armed non-state actor is not a signatory to the international covenants, the general belief is it has no obligation towards honoring or upholding the provisions. Further belief is it limits the culpability of those who provide material support to which the non-state actor. It is not so. Under the international humanitarian law, the LTT is considered a belligerent movement. It falls within the category of armed non-state actor. The act of belligerency is clearly defined in the international law, pointing out certain conditions to be fulfilled in order for a case of belligerency to be present. A, the existence of an armed conflict. B, occupation by a belligerent of a significant part of the national territory which LTT did. Such belligerent movement exercising sovereignty on part of the territory which LTT did for some time. And circumstances B, circumstances which made it necessary for outside states to define their attitude by means of recognition of belligerency. The LTT fulfilled all the above conditions defined in international law to qualify as belligerence. The effort to extend IHL to non-international armed conflicts ultimately resulted in Article 3 of the Geneva Convention, which is known as Common Article 3. Internal conflicts involve a high intensity of violence and cannot remain beyond the reach of international law, providing protection to both civilians and combatants. Non-international armed conflicts are covered by Common Article 3, Protocol 2, several other treaties, as well as by customary law. Customary law acts both as a complement and as a confirmation of the basic standard of set of both Protocol 2 and Common Article 3. If one carefully reads the Common Article 3, many of the provisions are applicable to the atrocities committed by the LTT. It also covers the material supporters who sustain tiger terrorism for decades from their overseas post, often traveling to LTT-held territory in Sri Lanka's north to provide legal counseling and other experts advice to leader Prabhakaran and top officials, like what Rudrakumaran did, and prepared young Tamils for combat, like what Adel Balasingham performed, that effectively engaged in fundraising, propaganda, and diplomatic endeavors, legal counseling, and defending the procurement of armaments, justifying the Tiger Movement, a liberation organization violating the provisions of the UN Charter, which forms the international humanitarian law. Article 3 of Protocol 2 gives the state the right to restore law and order, and the internal conflict cannot be taken as a justification for outside intervention. During the onslaught by the Tamil Tigers, Sri Lanka was conscious of what it was engaged in, upholding the provisions which is stated in the United Nations Charter as follows. I quote, and I quote, "Nothing in this protocol shall be invoked for a purpose of affecting the sovereignty of a state or the responsibility of a government by all legitimate means to maintain or re-establish law and order in the state or to defend the national unity and territorial integrity of the state." Article 1 relating to non-state armed groups highlights the applicability of the international law to violent atrocities of the Tamil Tigers. The relevant sections read, I quote, "Armed groups which under responsible command exercise such control over a part of the territory as enable them to carry out sustained and concerted military operations and to implement this protocol." Making an armed groups adhere to Article 1 means it is covered by the international humanitarian law. Article 1 of Protocol 2 clarifies that the protocol applies to armed conflict which takes place in the territory of a state party to the protocol. 2, between its armed forces and armed non-state actors, which are organized under responsible command, which command B exercise control over part of its territory, which LTT did, and C are they able to carry out continuous and intensive military operation and to implement the protocol. Article 44.3 of Protocol 2 states, and I quote, "In order to protect the civilian population from hostilities, civilians are not to be harmed if they are not taking part in attack or war activities or preparing attacks." It was a known factor to the United Nations and the Western nations that the LTT was using unarmed civilians as human shield and is covered by all these protocols and all these arrangements in the Charter. Why does the UNHRC ignore these facts? That's my question. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Gamage, for that presentation. Apologize for that technical difficulty we had before. As I'm told that all the presentations will be available through policy-research.ca website after this event. So our viewers can log on to the website and download the presentations that was made as part of this webinar. Next, we rightfully go to Mr. Rish Udavatta. After working for the corporate sector for many years, Mr. Udavatta is presently practicing as a full-time lawyer and a senior partner of a leading law firm in London. Mr. Udavatta is a researcher on Sri Lankan history and politics, and having published many articles on several aspects of Sri Lankan history. He is one of the 3 lawyers recognized by the Christchurch University as an emerging ethnic minority lawyer in the UK to deliver an inspirational speech to their recent law graduates. Please welcome Mr. Udavatta.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon. Good morning to everyone. Before I start my speech, I will discuss the background and come to where I am standing today. You know, the United Nations was formed in 1945, and when it was formed, The organization was based on the principles of sovereignty and equal rights of its members. Rightfully, when the war ended in Sri Lanka, they had the same approach. In 2009, when Sri Lanka was on the edge of ending its 30 years long civil war, United Nations was having a clear opinion that this was an internal affairs. And at that time, the president of the Human Rights Council, the Japanese ambassador Takazu, clearly said that if LTT surrenders their arms, the suffering would come to an end. Not only that, the Vietnamese ambassador also said it is a legitimate government fighting a terror group. Interestingly, members of the European Union were much supportive towards the battle against LTT at that time, and their attitude was towards Sri Lanka. And the Austrian ambassador clearly mentioned security forces activity in Sri Lanka is against a terrorist organization conducted by an elected government. So rightfully, they had the clear view that Sri Lankan government was fighting an internal war against a proscribed organization. They were supportive the Sri Lankan government, and they made a couple of other statements as well. So where did this go wrong and why? The answer is very clear. The WikiLeaks cable suggests the answer. On 20th January 2011, a serving Sri Lankan general was invited for a party in the United States Embassy. And head of the political affairs of the United States, Dr. Paul Carter has told him they know that his sons are in the UK, but American education is much better. Don't forget, American education is much better. And the US government will give him and his family permanent residency in the US if he is willing to testify against the then Defense Secretary in Sri Lanka. So this was going towards a different path, and the path was very clear at this point. Then he was given a piece of paper with several accusations amounting to be war crimes. He was asked to sign that documentation. So now, slowly the narrative is moving against Sri Lanka, and the above incident clearly indicates that there's a witch hunt has began to frame or push Sri Lanka against a blind wall, mainly for geopolitical reasons. And they are even ready to bribe a serving officer and disregard any law to manipulate the account. So after the previous, the Mahinda Rajapaksa regime, the previous government came to power, and they co-sponsored the 30/1 resolution. This resolution, when resolution was sponsored, they didn't have any mandate from the Sri Lankan government, or they didn't have any mandate from the parliament. And they didn't have any mandate from the people, Sri Lankan general public whatsoever. So therefore, rightfully, it's rightful to say that this 30/1 resolution was passed without a mandate from the Sri Lankan general public or Sri Lankan people. So, having considered the 30/1 resolution, the United Nations, having disregarded the sovereignty of the Sri Lankan people and Sri Lankan general public, the United Nations started to create invasive and also play an active role towards the Sri Lanka, and made the Sri Lankan internal issue and not an internal issue thereafter. So UN is fully aware of the Sri Lankan constitution has no provision to facilitate any international judiciary mechanism with regards to any alleged crimes committed in Sri Lanka. This is where infringement began. They were not worried about any principles of the UN Charter anymore. They wanted to impose something on the Sri Lankan people which was not approved by the by them and against the country's constitution. As my fellow speaker clearly described, the decision to co-sponsor a resolution against themselves by Sri Lanka never had any mandate whatsoever. It was never presented to Parliament, and it was never approved. And now the present situation, the present resolution is based on the previous resolution and the recommendations, some recommendations made by the previous resolution. Hence, from the point of Sri Lankan view, the sponsorship itself is not lawful exercise, and legality of this resolution is highly questionable. And this resolution, the present suggested resolution, doesn't talk about the serious crimes anymore. There are no war crimes. There are no crimes against humanity. However, on the basis of the present resolution, they're trying to preserve the evidence, created evidence compiled by advisory panel in order to use for their future purposes. Right. In their recommendation, they suggest that international independent investigative mechanism they have proposed an investigative mechanism. However, we don't still know what they have suggested, that what they're going for. This so-called evidence has been used or are going to be used against the future judicial actions against Sri Lankan government and some officials. So what are these evidence? Can you call them evidence? Or is this the right procedure that the United Nations is following at the moment? In my opinion, no. This evidence first, I'm quite reluctant to call them evidence. I will rather call them information. This information was gathered as a part of fact-finding mission to advise the then United Nations Human Rights Secretary Ban Ki-moon. So the threshold of this evidence was much lower than the threshold of a criminal case. So, like you are going to a police station and making a complaint to the police officer. Different to the complaints made to the police officer in a judicial process, in a criminal judicial process, the threshold should be extremely high. And it's beyond reasonable doubt. So these evidences, we don't know how they have compiled this evidence. Where did they get them? Where did they get these evidence from? Whether these are true. Normally, when someone cross-question or check the credibility of the evidence, they have to go through certain aspects. They have to find out whether the person's statement or whether the person's statement evidence is credible, whether he has made any complaint to the local law enforcement agencies, whether this evidence is given within a reasonable time period. However, in my point of view, that UN has failed to, or UN has never taken any steps to find out whether the credibility of the information provided by third party. Who provided this information? Was it through a judicial process? No. This evidence was compiled, this information was compiled and found through different channels. There could be human rights institutes, there could be non-government players, there could be other third parties. They had no chance whatsoever to scrutinize the evidences and the credibility of the said evidences. So now the United Nations is preserving this evidence, which is not taken or not compiled as a part of a judiciary system or judiciary process. So is this reasonable? Is this going to be the due process that they're going to follow? No. In any judicial system, this is not the due process. And we have, in Sri Lanka, we have signed the covenant to international civil and political, which is called ICCPR. In ICCPR, it clearly says that a person charged of a criminal offense under any law shall be entitled to examine or to have examined the witnesses against him and to obtain the attendance of witnesses on his behalf. So this is very clear. Now, if they go on this route, the alleged individuals would not have any opportunity to get their witnesses examined in order to establish their alleged crime on this role, with this regard. So this is not the justice we expect from an institute like United Nations. This is completely flawed. Not only that, the United Nations, Sri Lankan Constitution clearly says that Article 13, no person shall be arrested except according to procedures established by law. Any person arrested shall be informed of the person for his arrest. And 13.3 explains that any person charged with an offense shall be entitled to be heard in person or by lawyer at a fair trial by a competent court. No person shall be punished with death or imprisonment except by order of a competent court, made in accordance with the procedure established by law. The arrest, holding in custody, detention or other deprivation of personal liberty of a person pending investigation or trial shall not constitute a punishment. Every person shall be presumed innocent until he is proven guilty. So this is a clear infringement of the Sri Lankan Constitution and the ICCPR covenant, where Sri Lanka is a party, and this is a covenant not imposed by the United Nations Human Rights Council as well. So, having said that, there's another danger for this resolution. Resolution is making a political remarks with regards to R2P concept. What is this R2P concept? R2P is a concept developed by Western world with regards to penalize certain individuals from different jurisdictions when they are accused of serious crimes. Now, they are hinting in this act, they are hinting that Sri Lankan officials are going to be charged on the basis of R2P principle, and these preserved evidence will be used against them. Therefore, it is clear that this is clearly invasive against the Sri Lankan Constitution and also against ICCPR. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Udavatta, for taking the summary of the resolution and connecting with the Sri Lankan Constitution and pointing out where it infringes Sri Lankan sovereignty. Next, we go to our next presenter, Dr. Sarat Chandrasekhar from Toronto in Canada. Dr. Chandrasekhar obtained his PhD in sociology from the University of Toronto. He joined the Canadian Civil Service in 1996 and got an early retirement, having served Health Canada as a provincial director in Prince Edward Island. He now teaches sociology courses in his areas of specialization at the University of Toronto and McMaster University. He is currently the president of the Canadian Sri Lankan Center for Social Harmony. Please welcome Dr. Chandrasekhar.
Thank you, Anurag. Good morning and good evening to some of you. Subha Udasana Kweva, Subha Sandhya Kweva. Bonjour, bonsoir, Vanakkam, and Assalamu alaikum. Ladies and gentlemen, my friends and colleagues. My friends who spoke before me presented vividly the loopholes and the deficiencies in the UNHCR resolution under question. What I am going to do is to take you on a different path. I am a sociologist by training and a social development specialist in practice. So I would like to look at the issue of reconciliation. Everything comes down to that. And returning to full peace and harmony from the perspective of the ground socio-cultural realities in Sri Lanka. There's so much happening on the ground level today, which we cannot ignore. These happenings will set a new homegrown agenda for all of us to move forward with. My sources of information come from all published material and demonstrated actions by Tamil-speaking activists, scholars, and commentators, plus other foreign analysts like engineer Balanathan in Australia, Arun Siddharth, Eye surgeon Muthusamy Malravan, pilot Harsh Govind, who live in northern Sri Lanka today, and also people like late Professor Jayaratnam Wilson, and people like Lord Nesby of the British Parliament, and Stuart Bell in Canada are few names to mention. According to the technical definition of reconciliation, to me, it is nothing but restoration of friendly relations blended with a high dose of trust, which includes mutual respect. The Sinhalese respecting the Tamils, Tamils respecting the Muslims, and vice versa. An ability to work together and come into a common front against extremism and human rights violation, if there's any. Now, this is a message for all Sri Lankans, including the current politicians in all the political parties. The type of friendly relations has been going on in Sri Lanka across all provinces since the end of the armed conflict. I would even go further than that. We can even go back to the King Rajasinghe II era, when his cabinet consisted of forest dwellers, what we call the Veddas, as his ministers, and the presence of some French, Dutch foreigners like Dascon. Sri Lanka was on the Silk Route and was a hub of trade, according to Ibn Battuta, a Muslim traveler who spent several months in Sri Lanka. When D. Senanayake and his brother F.R. Senanayake were arrested and detained by the British Raj, it was none other than Ponnambalam Ramanathan who went to England and defended their case. He did not go there as a Tamil, he went as a Ceylonese. At that time, Sri Lanka was known as Ceylon. So I'm not sure how many Peradeniya graduates really know that the current female residence hall at Peradeniya campus is named after Ponnambalam Ramanathan. How many others have contributed to the Sri Lankan society? We need to be mindful of that. Anand Kumaraswamy, a historian and a critical artist, and Charles Sarwan, Lakshman Kadirgama, Murali Tharan, and Mohiddin Beg, Allah Mohiddin Beg, and even Rukmani Devi, they were actual contributors to the Sri Lankan society. The point I'm trying to drive at is that we have been a multicultural society which took care of each other for a long period of time. We need to retrieve those good sentiments which are buried in the sands of the Western colonialism. Of course, we cannot ignore the recent Easter Sunday brutality, presumably initiated by certain extremist elements and the reactions to them. I would like to spell out a few selected developments during the recent past, which set a stage for us to think of a homegrown solution to so-called ethnic issues we are facing. Colonel Gash of the defense attaché of Colombo during the time of the war, dispatches during the conflict and regular briefings to the British Parliament by Lord Nesby, the personal memoirs of Tamilani Jayakumaran, who was the director of the education director of LTTE, what they have written, what they have said, stand as valid proof of what the atrocities the LTTE has done and what fabrications the diaspora is performing all over the world today. Talking to an average Tamilian today, you can try it yourself. In the north and in the east, hardly you hear that there is an harassment going on, insults inflicted upon them by other Sri Lanka. In order to effect some long-lasting changes in human relationships, that is my primary concern, we need new knowledge, we need very strong and positive attitudes and subsequent behaviors. Let me begin with the required attitudinal changes. Kanta Balanathan, an engineer in power systems in Australia, wrote recently to Vijay Thanigasalam, the Tamil MP in Scarborough, Canada, on the 15th of 2020, regarding the Bill 104. In his letter, he wrote, there was no genocide in Sri Lanka. It was only a racial right initiated by the LTTE. He also says the basic principle of cohesive living is the main expectation in the minds of Tamils in Sri Lanka today. According to him, a Sri Lankan identity is what needs to be promoted. Looking at the Jewish question in Germany, taking another context, it is a fact that the Jewish people were well integrated into the German society during the First World War. They were all Germans who happened to be Jewish. Hitler, the dictator who spoiled this cordial relationship, created havoc during the Second World War. I have noticed in the Sri Lankan birth certificate today, the word Sri Lankan is used as the nationality, not the singular Tamil or anything else. Now, this is a great step forward, restoration of friendly relations and a unitary Sri Lanka. I consider myself a Sinhalese because I can speak Sinhalese language fluently. There's no particular blood group that I belong to as a Sinhalese. By me identifying as a Sri Lankan, I'm not going to lose my Sinhala heritage and the cultural traits. So similarly, I do not see any harm to all of us in identifying ourselves as Sri Lankan. That's not going to affect your particular ethnic origin. Then we can intermingle, we can interact, do many things as members of one nation. This change has begun in moderate thinkers in Sri Lanka as well as in foreign countries. Arun Siddharth, who is now spearheading a national movement in Sri Lanka, incorporating the Sinhalese, the Muslims, and Tamil people, purposefully admitted that we all are Sri Lankans. Tamil is my birth and the first language, but to others, I would go as a Sri Lankan, and we all should go as Sri Lankan. The support Arun seems to have received from new generation of Sinhalese and the Tamils look very promising. This is a strong attempt on the part of the ordinary people to maintain a unitary sovereign state. Most of these developments, the UN has deliberately ignored. It is a misconception that we all own Sri Lanka. We do not own Sri Lanka, but we have been given permission to live there because we were born there. The Mother Earth of Sri Lanka owns us, not the other way around. That is why we come and go, but the Mother Sri Lanka stays and continues. All Sri Lankans born on Sri Lankan soil have the right to live anywhere they like on the island. Now take some statistics. For instance, Sri Lanka today, over 52 to 59% of the Tamil speakers live happily outside the north and the east. Since 1948, Tamil population grew at the rate of 2.72% in Sinhalese-dominated areas. This is almost double the rate for Tamils in Tamil-dominated areas, north and the east. Between 1981 and 2009, The Tamil population in the western province alone grew at the rate of 1.32% per annum, while the Sinhalese rate was actually below 1%. Now, who is going to claim the genocide under these circumstances? It is our primary responsibility to preserve Sri Lanka as a unitary nation. Tamil speakers living in and around Colombo own land, houses, doing jobs, leading a very lucrative lifestyles. Over 300,000 Tamil speakers are doing well without any ethnic fighting. The Muslim friends are also doing the same thing. So there is a social class factor and a social caste factor built into this. Our main cities like Colombo, Kandy, Jaffna, all three groups are living peaceful. They have jobs, they have good social contacts. Many of them speak all three languages. And also there are intermarriages happening now. Within Canada itself, during the last 10 years, we have seen an increase of intermarriages Sinhala Tamil by 24%. But how about the rural folks in places like Thanamalville or in Kilinochchi or Putlam? They are the most vulnerable on the island. No sufficient food, no shelter, no Wi-Fi, inundated with socio-economic problems. We all need to help those vulnerable people. It has to be a national effort, not an ethnicity-based plan of action. They all are Sri Lankan by any definition that you use. Take the language issue. Tamil is now taught in schools all over Sri Lanka. In Sinhala areas, it is not a problem to find somebody or a Tamil teacher to teach Tamil to Sinhala students. However, in the north and the east, there's a problem of finding Sinhala teachers to teach Sinhala to the Tamil students. Now, language is a very powerful tool for restoration and the unity. The Sinhalese must take a special interest in finding good Sinhala teachers to the north. Recent results of the examinations of Sri Lankan North indicates that the failure rate in mathematics, English are much higher compared to that of the rates in the southern Sri Lanka. The Tamil students must have the same right as the students in other areas, and the Muslim students as well. These issues can be addressed by a national strategy, not a strategy based on an ethnicity-based plan of action. The government, with assistance of the national forces, removed an enormous amount of landmines installed by the LTTE. Now today, anyone can go to Jaffna without being bothered about bombs. The UN has not even acknowledged the big project the army has accomplished in a short while. We need to think about more opportunities for all Sri Lankans, the Tamils, Muslims, and the Sinhalese and the others, to work and play together. I should congratulate Sangakkara and Muralidharan for spearheading a cricket program in the north. We need to build special high schools wherever possible, especially in the north and in other areas, where children of all three communities can learn together. It will not be just learning, but understanding and respecting each other. Sri Lankan universities have this opportunity today. I know Jaffna University has a fairly big Sinhala population now. Drama festivals combining Sinhala and Tamil drama will also open up new vistas for all of us. I remember this happened during the time of Sarachandra at Peradeniya. These activities, just a few I mentioned, will restore trust and build confidence as Sri Lankans. One may wonder how we as individuals could promote these things. It requires a lot of effort and commitment and courage. Applying pressure on politicians is one of such progressive steps. This requires further explanation. Let me now conclude. There is a government institution called the National Institute of Social Development, which produces professional social workers in all three backgrounds, Sinhala, Tamil, Muslim. They learn together at the BA and MSW levels. They have the experience working and learning together, and they know how to love each other and the ability to go out and help people change. They are social change agents with professional skills. We need to employ these people to work in those most vulnerable areas so that homegrown solutions will be in our sight. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Chandrasekhara, for your eloquent presentation. As part of it, thank you again for promoting cohesive living and that Sri Lankan identity is what needs to be promoted. also highlighting the importance of language to bridge ethnicity gaps. With that being said, I'd like to go to the question and answers session. We have received a lot of questions, and unfortunately, we will not be able to address it in this forum. However, the questions will be answered through email by by the Ontario Centre for Policy Research. First question that we have received from Mr. Mahinda Gunasekara, Toronto, Canada. In reading the question, I would like to pose this to Mr. Jairaj, Mr. Udawata, and Mr. Gamage. I will read the question and invite you to give your feedback. Let's try to limit the feedback for about 3 minutes, as we have a few more questions to answer. All right. So Mr. Gunasekar asks, does the UN Charter permit resolutions to be brought on member nations based on unsubstantiated allegations contained in a personal report requisition by the former UN Secretary General, where the alleged claims have been locked away for 20 years till the year 2031? Mr. Palihawadna, your remarks.
If it is going to a short answer, I can say yes, because the Human Rights Council belongs to the Human Rights Commissioner. It belongs to the member states. So those member states can bring any resolutions before the Human Rights Council. If it is going for, if someone is objecting to the resolution, then it goes for a debate. Not debate, it go for a vote. Then with the majority vote, it will go through. So that is the thing. It doesn't matter whether it is right or wrong. It doesn't matter whether it is based on the substantiated or unsubstantiated evidence. If a country bring up a resolution, it will discuss and it will go through. So that is the problem. We all know that the report, we call it OISL report, it was based on the BOE report prepared by, we call it Darsuman report, prepared by the advisory committee to the Ban Ki-moon, the General Secretary at that time. It was taken in, not the evidence not taken in a proper way. The balance of probability or the threshold of the evidence taken is not in a proper way. There are a lot of allegations, but still it is submitted to the council and it was passed through the council. It was accepted by the council. Unfortunately, the then government of Sri Lanka accepted it, and the subsequent resolution also been co-sponsored. So it can be, the correct answer is it can be.
Thank you, Mr. Palihadna. Next, I'd like to call upon Ms. Udawata. What's your take on this? You're muted.
Yes, I totally agree with Mr. Palihavadana. When a country brings a resolution, depending on the circumstances and the evidence they have, it's the other party or the United Nations, within the perimeters of United Nations, to challenge it. So basically, when they bring any resolution, that depends on the evidence they have, whether that could be, whether we can see it from a different angle, or whether we challenge it, or the opposition party challenge it as unsubstantial. They always believe that this resolution is brought to enhance the human rights issues of the member states. It's the duty of the respondent party to respond the resolution or challenge the resolution with substantial answers.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Gamage, what's your thoughts? Mr. Gamage, you are muted.
Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Yeah. the 40,000 figure is the one that, that has gone into this whole thing. That 40,000 were killed at the last stages of the war. But the fact remains that the United Nations or UNHRC never considered this is not the Darusman report is not a United Nations official report. Really, it's not an advisory group that has been this thing. Now, the cable that went from the American embassy to Washington, which is now open now, cable in somewhere in May after the war, the civilian casualties were about 7,000. And then the Lord Naseby came out with a figure from the based on some of the declassified reports that were made available to him by the reports that came from the Defence Attache's office from the UK High Commission in Colombo, was almost 7,000 figure. Now these are completely ignored. These are completely ignored by the United Nations and UNHRC. They never this thing. They go by this 40,000 fictional figure. So yes, United Nations can bring any resolution really. Now United States are completely opposed to that, and then some of the resolutions went to International Criminal Court, and they were coming to the United States to not investigate, but to even to talk to certain people. United States no, and cancelled all the visas and saying that no, that you all are infringing the sovereignty of our nation. Now there was a outcry in 2009 when President Obama took office that there should be a commission to investigate the so-called atrocities of the Bush administration, but that took place in Iraq and this thing. President Obama said, that if we have international organization investigating our this thing, it infringes the sovereignty of the United States. And then he said, we look forward, not backward. Now, this is exactly what Sri Lanka should have done at that time, really. So this 40,000 figure goes all over. Yes, United Nations, UNHRC can pass any resolution, really. 47 members, out of the 47 members, if a majority adopts it, now that's what happened to 30/1. It was never subject to any approval by the cabinet of Sri Lanka, not missing. It was just passed there, allowing, advocating foreign jurists to come to Sri Lanka to investigate. Now that is infringement of Sri Lanka's sovereignty.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Gamage. We have a question for Ms. Hamid. Nelson Munasinghe from Colombo asks, what is your opinion, including Operative Para 8 Muslim burial matter already resolved? What is your opinion on that?
Yeah, thank you. I thank Mr. Munasinghe for asking that very important question. It is a very sensible question. Any person would understand. UNHRC is an organization which is meant to keep peace, and when human rights violations do happen, for them to come and address. But in the case of Sri Lanka, as I said earlier in my speech, it was mandatory cremation for all the citizens of the country. It was not targeted specifically the Muslim community, even though we got very hurt that the government could have gone beyond science to accommodate us, but then they took time because it was a pandemic situation. It was very new to us. World was coming to know what it is all about. But now eventually the government has issued the gazette, and then we Muslims are being buried. The problem is resolved, and I don't see a reason other than vengeance or whatever the reason could be. It's just unbelievable. The UNHRC continues to take a problem which is already been addressed by a nation. That's all UNHRC wants. If some nation is violating, they want, what they expect is to do it right. But when it is done right, I can't see a reason why they still hold on to the paragraph 8, and I think it should be taken out.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Hamid. Next question. We have received J. Arunachalam from Montreal, Canada. The question asks, if a resolution favors Sri Lanka, what are the consequences? If a resolution favors Sri Lanka, what are the consequences? And I would like to pose this question to Mr. Ratnamalala, Mr. Uduvatta, Mr. Jairaj, and Neville.
Before we go, I like to give a little answer to the previous question before Ms. Jehan was answering her question. The suggesting, I'm talking about some of the core group member countries, that those who suggesting the evidences which is not could be used even in their countries according to their particular evidence acts. Where I'm living in Canada, the Canadian Evidence Act does not allow to take hearsays. So I don't think any other countries in the core group is allowing any of those evidences taken to a court if those are hearsays and cannot be used, can be used against somebody who claim to be alleging somebody has done something wrong. This proves that how low level this core group countries has gone through getting this resolution into UNHRC. That means, that further says that this is not a legal issue that they are raising. This is a political issue that they wanted to raise against Sri Lankan government. So that's why all Sri Lankans has to come forward, defending their nation, protecting their sovereignty, because their sovereignty in their hand, and should come forward supporting Sri Lankan government fighting this resolution. And all Muslims, all Tamils who are called themselves Sri Lankans has to come forward to defend their country, because these resolutions are political in nature, nothing else. Can you repeat? I'm sorry, I just forgot the question again.
You have already the two minutes gone, but I guess we can extend 2 more minutes. If a resolution favors Sri Lanka, what are the consequences? If it favors,
I mean, if it is favors, it's favors Sri Lanka. I mean, what else? I mean, I don't think there's anything we can. I mean, that's the best thing we can expect. I mean, if it is favor in Sri Lanka.
Okay. All right.
Yeah, I will answer the question next. If the resolution in favor of Sri Lanka, that means if it is not gone through as expected by the core group, that means the end of this resolution. But still, the core group or any other country can bring up another resolution next time when the Human Rights Council is up. But there is a legitimacy on this next attempt, because Sri Lankan government clearly stated in 2020 March session that Sri Lanka is withdrawing from the co-sponsorship and is going for a full withdrawal of the resolutions afterwards. Even in this session, at the beginning, the foreign minister clearly stated that the foreign minister is expecting the Human Rights Council is going to closure of the resolution in regards to Sri Lanka. That means Sri Lanka will not going to bring up a counter resolution when this goes, when this resolution is going to fail. Then Sri Lankan government's is expected that there's going to be no more resolutions in regards to Sri Lanka. So that is what my understanding in regards to the Sri Lankan government's perspective is a closure.
Okay, thank you. So we're looking at closure. Once this is
Can
done, it's done.
Can I get two minutes
Yes, go
to
ahead.
explain my view? I have a completely different view about this resolution, and we were discussing about my opinion. That's completely different. Now, when we read and when we were going through Michelle Bachelet's reports and previous documents, we can clearly see that they have a different intention in their mind. If this goes in favor of Sri Lanka, that means if we defeat the resolution, they are going to go for the next step, which is R2P, universal jurisdiction. They are promoting the member states. Now they're trying this in Malawi as well. They are promoting member states to go for universal jurisdiction based on the preserved evidence and also with their own independent findings. So it's going to be a danger to Sri Lanka. And Tamil diaspora is very much constructively working towards this, and they know they know that this is highly political, and also obviously this is highly political more than addressing the human rights issues. So I call this always an open-ended resolution. Although we defeat the resolution, we have to face the consequences. If they pass the resolutions, they'll be going to a different stage. That's a different case. However, if we defeat this, they are keeping their options open, and they will, in my opinion, they will go for the next step, which is R2P doctrine. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Duarte. Dr. Neville, what's your thought?
Can you hear me, Amra?
Yes, I can.
Okay, but actually my personal opinion is resolution if came on favor. So if we have more votes, and so we won the resolution, and my understanding is that that council cannot bring another resolution against us. So because that matter, whatever things is already has been addressed, and it has been defeated. So as example, in the common law, so we know that if somebody prosecuted at once, so they cannot prosecute it at second time. So therefore, they cannot go around and come to the different perspective to enforce that another resolution against Sri Lanka. But so here's the important thing. Always there is a but. Sri Lanka is committed to provide reconciliation and accountability process. So that's what Sri Lanka has to continue. Even though if we had to win this resolution, Sri Lanka involved with the duress process and for the normal process, and provide justice for the Tamil, Muslims, and all the communities. Then we have a strong ground. So we can go to again for the Human Rights Council and say, okay, so we have addressed our issue. But there is an issue with the definition of the accountability with the Human Rights Council and the Sri Lankan perspectives. That is one of the biggest problem. Human rights, because the Tamil diaspora are very constructively and active, and they are highly concerned about the accountability for the death. But people who are living in the north, Tamil community, they don't have water, so they don't have food, they don't have education, and so they are lack of all the facilities. Now we have to be more concerned about to provide the support for the people who are living. Then other issue is the accountability process, and accountability process, we believe, and the Sri Lankan believe, as a restorative justice and religious-based approach. So that's why Sri Lanka rehabilitated 13,000 people. And the president has been, president pardoned all army officials as well as LTT cadre. But dangerous if this pass the resolution, it will affect for the ethnic harmony in the country, my opinion. Because in the, I think para 5, and it says they want to bring accountability for Western accountability for the LTT cadre. So now we have rehabilitators all the young Tamil youth misguided by the LTTE, and we have rehabilitated. Government has, now they are married and they have children. Some of them are going to the universities, and all things happen. And we are not going to open the file for them, period. And the government of Sri Lanka, we are not going to open the file for them. It is done, and they are part of the Sri Lanka. So therefore, what I'm telling you, this resolution is completely, totally infringed the sovereignty of Sri Lanka. It is not a justice for even Tamil LTT cadre, because I don't know why this overseas LTT is pushing forward this agenda. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Hevagi. Sorry.
Anurag, can I have 1 minute?
Of course, go ahead.
Yeah, as Dr. Hevagi said, accountability and transparency are the two things that the Western countries think. The week ago, when Secretary of State, U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken addressed the UNHRC, he mentioned specifically Sri Lanka should go for accountability and transparency. Those are the two things that the United States has been pushing. So United States, I don't think the United States wants a country divided into two, because I don't agree with that. But the fact remains that the US had been pushing this. And blind you, now the State Department is a different State Department to that of under Trump. It is a completely different State Department. I can see that, that the appointments that Mr. Biden had made in the State Department and the Department of Homeland Security. Under the Department of Homeland Security, you get the division called the War Crimes and Human Rights. So there are people who have been stationed and appointed to those areas. And here, Secretary Blinken specifically mentioned that Sri Lanka should go on accountability and transparency. Those are the two areas. Even if there's no resolutions in the UNHRC, those two, the UK, Canada, United States are definitely going to push.
Thank you, Mr. Gamage. And you highlighted a very valid concern. Whatever the mechanism, whatever the jurisdiction out there, Sri Lanka's got to do the right thing. So, next question. I'd like to open this question for all the panelists, and I'll invite them. And if there is no opinion, that's fine as well. Next question is, if a resolution against Sri Lanka comes through, what are the consequences? And the previous one we discussed about if it comes in favor. Next question, and this question comes from Miss Helen Lawson in Johannesburg, South Africa. If a resolution against Sri Lanka comes through, what are the consequences? I'd like to call upon Mr. Udavatta. What are your thoughts? Mr. Udavatta, you are muted.
As we have gone through the Michelle Bachelet's report a few times, if the resolution passes through, there will be recommendations made by the co-sponsors as well as member states and the United Nations Human Rights Council. So we have to fulfill those requirements made by the Council and the member states, and that will be a burden against us. Not only that, so all the other parties have a valid ground to argue that Sri Lanka has not done any constructive measures, and also Sri Lanka is not honestly committed to address these issues whatsoever. So we will be the underdogs, and they have the upper hand to impose certain conditions. Unless we meet the conditions, we will be given pressure by the international community as well as other, including the co-sponsors, to meet certain requirements set by the resolution.
Thank you. Ms. Hamid, your thoughts? You're muted. You're muted, ma'am.
1 minute. Okay. Yeah, I would like to tell. I would like to highlight on what happens. What would happen to the communities in Sri Lanka if a resolution is passed? It is just the dispute or any type of conflict which is being addressed in UNHRC year after year for 12 years. It has been like a circus now. It is like it is going around and round and round. It's been long time, and then people are living here in Sri Lanka in absolute peace. The peace is available in the community. If anyone comes to Sri Lanka, they will be able to see that all 3 or 4, and there are smaller communities, they all live in absolute peace. So it would be very unnecessary for a resolution to be passed, and the majority of people know that this resolution is being pushed by Tamil diaspora. And this time particularly, we also know that there is a small involvement by the Muslim diaspora also. I would ask for the UNHRC and for the Tamil diaspora and for the Muslim diaspora, these institutions, they can only enforce. There's no peace there. You know, it is peace has to come within. It has to come within us. So I think it would be more detrimental to peace. A resolution will not be the solution for Sri Lanka. Instead, absolute peace is available in Sri Lanka after the war. So it is just not right to go for a resolution against Sri Lanka. It is just not right. Yeah.
Thank you, Ms. Hamid. And also to note that Ms. Hamid is in Sri Lanka. She's aware of the ground situation in Sri Lanka and is very accustomed with different communities' actions. So her recommendation to say that that there is lasting peace and there is peace among communities in Sri Lanka is very valuable to note, and to know that a new resolution will disturb this social harmony. All right. So going on to other panelists, I'd like to welcome Dr. Chandrasekhar. What's your thoughts on this?
I will go with what Jihan said a little while ago, and also going back to my presentations. I would take this, or the Sri Lankans should take this as a new opening for us to work together, to bring more harmony, more measurable changes in our behaviors towards each other, and then fight as one country. I think this will be the challenge for the Sri Lankans. And I think the government also will realize that, of course, at the legal level, there will be several things happening. You know, they will go to the other levels, you know, higher levels. Or as we know, the UNHCR has no kind of authority to impose sanctions, but they will be pushing other countries. But then on our part, we have to show that, you know, what you guys are telling, what you are portraying in the world stage is not what is happening in the country. We are working together. We have, I mean, if you go by statistics, you know, how many Muslim people are in the government service and how many judges are the Tamil origin and how many Sinhalese people are living in the north and the east. And all of those information, I think we'll have to make a very firm effort to ascertain to the world, no, what you guys are telling is with a different agenda. I know they are not interested in, you know, bringing harmony inside the country. You know, that's what we see clearly. And also they have another agenda, that is the geopolitical, you know, factors in the Indian Ocean. So those are the hidden agendas of the United States and even Japan and other countries, you know. So we need to keep all these things. And the most important thing, the first and foremost, we need to educate all Sri Lankans about what is going on. Because I know some of them are friends that we talk to. They tend to ignore some of the things that are happening. They need to be aware that, you know, we need to work as a team. We need to work as one nation, not as a Sinhalese, Tamil, or Muslims. And even recently, you know, I remember the Vedda leader was also talking openly about certain issues. So we need to push the government as well as the people themselves to work on the homegrown solution to this one. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Chandrasekhar. I'd like to invite Dr. Neville. Your thoughts?
Thank you very much, Aruna. But actually, my thought is here, if we lose the resolution, there will be another action Sri Lanka has to take. So because we know that this is not there is no human rights issue. This is the purely political issue. That's meaning we can directly connect it to the core group and other countries who is enforcing through this other mechanism to the sovereignty issue in Sri Lanka, infringing sovereignty issue. If we have a case, purely we have a case, then we can go to International Court of Justice and file the case, and they are going to interfere with the sovereignty of Sri Lanka. Then International Court of Justice will look at the issue not on the human rights ground. They will look at the other issue and all the what are the elements, and now they are going to look at the evidence, how they collected the evidence, what is the consequences of the POE report, and everything can be open. So therefore, that route is very long, but there is a possibility to defend Sri Lanka. So therefore, I don't, then if we lose, there is no, so then other issue is that Human Rights Council, United Nations Human Rights Council has no educative authority. It is not a court, it is not a, tribunal, that all the actions, what they have to do, they have to enforce through the member states. So that's what the operative paragraph 6 is going to tell us. Now, that's the issue. So many legal issues will come. And you cannot run the case according to the country's law is not acceptable. So as example, our barrister, Krish Udavatta clearly say that there is some issue with the hearsay exception, except in the law. And Hasaka said, so there is some hearsay is not accepted. But according to my understanding, there are some exception in Canada to accept the hearsay, but it has to be very thoroughly contested in the law. So, but anyhow, so those are the things. So therefore, if we lose the case, no matter what, Sri Lanka is going to do the reconciliation process, and government has allocated millions of dollars for the repatriation and paying the money and paying money for the Human Rights Commission and to function and enhance. I think one of the missing person commission, the Sri Lanka government increased the money 522%. So that process is going on. So therefore, there is we don't have to much worry about that issue, because even though if we have go for another jurisdiction, and there will be a lot of for the legal obstacle, as long as Sri Lanka is doing the thing to bring the reconciliation and accountability in our perspective. There is no any rule to brought down Western accountability has to be established in Sri Lanka. So it is not going to work. So we know what happened in Iraq, and Western democracy didn't work. And we know what happened in the Syria, Western democracy didn't work. And so what happened to Sudan? They divided the country with the ethnic line, Western democracy didn't work. And we have our homegrown solution. And now Tamils and all other ethnic communities are living peace. Only the diaspora Tamil, so if I say diaspora Tamil, it's wrong. Diaspora, LTT supportive Tamil, very small fraction, because I have a lot of Tamil friends, and that small fraction is promoting and pushing this whole accountability and to punish the Sri Lanka, to get the revenge from Sri Lanka, because they have defeated the war. So that is the reason. It's a purely political, but Sri Lanka is firmly, and all the nations, all the singular Muslim, Tamil, and all other communities have to stand firmly against this resolution. This is totally unacceptable. So that's what I want. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Evagi. I'd like to call upon Mr. Ratnamalala.
Yes, I have two approaches for that question. One is, this is a dangerous precedent that given to the world, especially the other countries in the UNHRC has to look at their issues, go to the mirrors and look at their faces, because this could come back as a boomerang to their countries as well. So that is one thing. If this resolution passed through the UNHRC, because the international jurisdiction, they might also get some attacks through international jurisdictions into their particular countries because of this bad president. And the other thing is the reconciliation cannot be made through a law. You cannot. It has to come forward from the people. I really agree with I definitely agree with Ms. Jehan, what she said. It has to come from the people. So Sri Lankan reconciliation actually happening without any. You don't need to push a lot of things, but it's happening through the people. Just only thing is that what you have to do is through the laws that you take out some of the barriers that creating these separations. As an example, if you go to Jaffna, there's a law called Tesawalami. Tesawalami is to protect the Velala properties from other non-Velala people. They're scared of non-Velala people will come to live as neighbors. Though they told the then Dutch government to accept this law as a customary law in Sri Lanka. So those things protect. Barriers. Those are barriers to harmony between the communities. So nobody can buy a land in Jaffna from other communities because of that law. So those things has to go. These are only things that the law can do, but real harmony to come through the people. So that's my answer.
Thank you, Mr. Athamala. And Mr. Palihavatna?
Yeah, when you're looking at this current resolution, what I can see is that apart from the paragraph 6, 7, and 8, all the other sections are similar to the previous resolutions. So all the other is not fully similar, but somewhat similar to the other resolution. So 6, 7, 8 is clearly aimed at the current Sri Lankan government. It is something new in this resolution. That is what I couldn't find, that the popular sentence showing in all these reports and all these resolutions saying that atrocities committed by the Sri Lankan armed forces, that sentence is not there anymore. So that means it is, when you're looking at the evidence gathering mechanism showing on the paragraph 6, it doesn't say that the evidence gathering process is for is related to the final stages of war. It is just in general. So that means the past, current, and future. So that means the Human Rights Council, by this resolution, is making the Sri Lankan government is vulnerable to in trade negotiations, especially if one country has the universal jurisdiction, then the Sri Lankan government is going to have a trade negotiation with this country. Then the country has the jurisdiction. We say, okay, if you're not agreeing to this clause, we have the universal jurisdiction. Now our Human Rights Commissioner is set up a body to send us evidence. As soon as we get the evidence, we will file a case against you. Then agree to this sentence. So this is unprecedented. This is not a right way of doing businesses around the world. So this is kind of a hijacking a poor small nation. So that is what happened after this is going on, because all the other sections is no valid anymore, because they have been discussed, that they have been in the table for a long period of time. Nothing has happened apart from what part accepted by the Sri Lankan government. As long as the Sri Lankan government is not a part of this resolution, is not co-sponsor of the resolution, is nothing going to happen. Nothing is going to achieve from the Sri Lankan side. Only thing is that the power is going to give to the nations, the others outside nations, to use as a weapon against Sri Lanka. That's all.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Gamage, your thoughts?
I am one of the frustrated employee of the U.S. Department of State. So are some of my retired senior foreign service officers. Frustrated this way because some of the things that we have told the hierarchy of the State Department in Washington over the years have been rejected. Now, in 2001, 2004, the peace arrangement taken by the Norway. The person who was involved in that peace arrangement from the United States was the number 2 of the State Department, Richard Armitage, the Deputy Secretary of the State Department. Now they were trying to have a peace accord based in Sri Lanka. With whom did they communicate? With the Tamil diaspora activists. With the activists of the Tamil diaspora. They didn't even communicate with the legitimate Tamil political parties in Sri Lanka. You see? And that was during the Vikram Singh government, that area. You see? And then in 2014, the United States Department of State's Office of Inspector General sent 3 people to Sri Lanka's American embassy to investigate, and they investigated in Colombo too. The reporting practices of the United States Embassy in Colombo, 2009-2010. Now that is the time that all the reports from Sri Lanka went to Washington. Inspector General's report was a damning report, was that their reporting was all cockeyed. There was reports were all not fabricated, but they didn't report properly. Because the political chief at that time, the ambassador at that time, didn't have much training on those jobs. You see, that is one. Other thing is the activists of the Tamil diaspora, activists who had been associating with the LTTE war during the time, activists who are even now activists, they are well aware that the United States State Department officials, top officials, the United Kingdom, the Canadian Foreign Ministry, they listen to them. Their public diplomacy is much higher than the Sri Lankan public diplomacy. So therefore, there are a lot of things. Now there are some of the things that the United States State Department or the Canadian Foreign Ministry or the United Kingdom's Foreign Ministry are not interested that a country is 18% urban, 77% rural. In the 18% urban, there are Tamils, Muslims, and Sinhalese who have all the privileges, education, everything. 77% Monoragala and Kilinochi have no facilities at all. They are not interested in that. They are not interested that they are talking about the Tamils leaving Sri Lanka because of the war. In fact, if you take the statistics, most Tamil left Sri Lanka before 83. They are very well educated Sri Lankans who are Tamil in English and all those things. They left 83. Actually, today there is a lady who was born in the United States, who's one of the top officials of United States Vice President Kamala Harris' office. Their parents are both doctors. They came from Sri Lanka before 83. You see, this is what it is really. And then, as I told earlier in my presentation, that the officials, that the people who are in the Tamil diaspora who are propagating all those things are the people, are the voices that have been recognized by all these people. You see, so this is how it is. The thing. So the 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 political agitation of the Tamil diaspora, where are they going now? In fact, they are going for R2P, that's true. But the fact remains that the final target was to have a referendum in North and East under UN supervision. That's what they're targeting.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Can I
Thank you,
add something to the what you were saying?
Yes, go ahead.
Yeah, just as at the end of the war in 2009, I, with some of my colleagues, went to meet Deputy Foreign Minister in Canada at the time, who just finished a tour in Sri Lanka just after the war, and we were trying to raise Canadian. We were trying to ask Canadians to go there and help Sri Lankan government to clear the mines. At the same meeting, in the back door, their assistants, the particular minister's assistants, invited Tamil diaspora, so-called LTT, pro-LTT Tamil diaspora members into the same meeting, and they were showing, pointing at the people who were at the IDP camps at the time, just finished the war, and people at the camp, and we were saying, just if you really wanted to, clean up the camps, you just has to clear the mines first. Help the Sri Lankan government to clear the mines, because Canadian has a good system. Canadians are expert in that. So, but they listen to the other party. They never help Sri Lankan government to clear the mines, and this is how it works. So, definitely Sri Lankan government has to come with revamp their foreign ministry and start hiring people who can speak as Sri Lankans and give a background of their country's situations, needs to the other countries.
Anurag, one more point, Anurag. Can I?
Yes, you got 1 minute.
Yeah. Most people have not seen this report. This was classified report, but it was declassified recently. I don't think even the Sri Lanka's foreign ministry people have seen this. I'm giving this message to the Sri Lanka's foreign ministry to go through that report. That report was 84, 86, two reports, a document run jointly, the assessment by the CIA and the State Department. That one is the most important thing in that one is talking about now I'm talking about 84, 86. They are talking about the minority rights, devolution of power at that time, devolution of power to the north and east, and now that whole mindset of 84, 86, that document is the one that whole thing governed until 2009, because from 2006 to 2009, except air surveillance and Navy surveillance, the US completely cut military aid to Sri Lanka, because they thought that, in that report says that if we give military aid to Sri Lanka, they will use it against the minority Tamils, and we will have a problem with other countries. So this is how it is. So it is a set mind. This is set mind. I am a frustrated person, really. And Sri Lanka's foreign ministry has to go through all these things and find out what went wrong from 1980s up to now. Thank you.
Yes, it is, and I hear your concern, and you are not alone in that. There are many hundreds and thousands of citizens and patriots and expatriates feeling the same. With that being said, I have a very quick question to the lawyers from United Kingdom. Jasmine De Silva from Sri Lanka asks, I'd like to ask why Adele Balasingham is not prosecuted and why the British government is shielding her. These are double standards. Why? So I'd like to invite Jaraj and Mr. Duarte to comment on this.
Yes.
It is sorry to say that it is, we have been asking this question so many times, even from the Sri Lankan government, as well as the Human Rights Council, as well as the British government for a long period of time. So it is the humanitarian protection, and the Sri Lankan government wasn't prepared to do anything because of the way that the Sri Lankan government see the accountability might be the reason. And the UK government is proactive on all the other activities of terrorism and terrorist-related activities, but not about this one. And Human Rights Council, let's not bother to listen to these kind of stories anymore. So this is a very shocking status of the affairs of the country we are living at the moment, unfortunately. But I think Frisch will explain. He has the knowledge on this matter for a long period of time.
Yes, we have been closely watching about Adel Balasingham's situation, and for some reasons, Adel Balasingham has not been prosecuted in United Kingdom, and she is living in this country for over 2 decades now. The reason behind this is when we prosecute someone, yes, we know that she is culpable of committing certain crimes, but we cannot just go to the courts and say, yes, she has committed certain crimes, and therefore she needs to be prosecuted. We need to find the victims. So where are the victims? Can they come forward? We can, with most of the victims who are garlanded with cyanide capsules or suicide jackets are living in Sri Lanka. Without the victims' accounts, credible accounts, there won't be any successful lawsuits in this country or any other country. Just because of that reason, and even the Sri Lankan High Commission here is quite reluctant, and she has been given the humanitarian protection. Although we accept the fact that humanitarian protection should be given to the people who needs humanitarian protection, Adel Balasingham's case is exceptional. We have seen the video clips, we have seen certain footages with she was wearing LTT uniform, and she was garlanding cyanide capsules, but it's not adequate to file a lawsuit in any country because this is going to be a criminal lawsuit. Therefore, this is down to the Sri Lankan diplomats to negotiate with the lawmakers of United Kingdom, and this matter need to be taken diplomatically and ask the reasons why she is given a safe haven in the United Kingdom.
Aruna, shall I add one sentence to that?
Go ahead.
If this resolution goes through, there is an evidence gathering mechanism from the Human Rights Council. So the Human Rights Council can gather the evidence against Adel Balasingham and pass it to a country to prosecute against, or pass it to the main co-sponsor, United Kingdom government, to prosecute against her. So that is a good opportunity for UK government while co-sponsoring the resolution and start a proceeding against his as a guardian.
Yeah.
Anura, may I come up with one point?
1 minute, please.
Yeah.
Thank you.
In 1997, the U.S. Department of State declared LTT as a foreign terrorist organization, right? 1997. A year later, the State Department made a change in that. Now, when they when they declared that it was a foreign terrorist organization, they put into the box of Al Qaeda and every other terrorist organization. 1 year later, they made a change. They took LTT out of that global war on terrorism, what GWOT that we are talking about, global war on terrorism, Bushes. They took it out 1 year later, and so that LTT became a separate unit, nothing to do with global war on terrorism, nothing at all. You know, so after this came actually not in 97, 2001 when Bush became president. He made the change in the State Department and took the LTT out of this whole terrorist thing out. So LTT became a different thing. So that is how the attitude works, US. I know attitude works. So that's how it is. And a lot of people do not know this, that how they were taken out of that global war on terrorism by Bush administration.
Thank you, Mr. Gamage. Now, that concludes our webinar. There have been many questions that has come through, and on behalf of the organizers, I would like to apologize that we will not be able to answer all the questions. However, they will be responded through email. I would like to take this opportunity to thank the panelists, Mr. Hasakaratna Malala, Ms. Jehan Hamid, Mr. Dar Gamage, Mr. Jayaraj Palewardna, Dr. Neville Hevage, Mr. Rishudavat, Dr. Saras Chandrasekhara, for their excellent presentation and timely presentation, and having timely discussions about the pending questions in most of Sri Lankans' minds. What's going to happen to Sri Lanka? While there are so many unanswered questions, I'm sure these gentlemen and the ladies and gentlemen were able to provide some insight of what to expect. The discussion does not end here. The discussion will continue through the social media and through email. I would also like to take this opportunity to thank all those who joined from from the Zoom platform, from online, and thanking various organizations that took this live feed and made their own feed and transformed it to their own followers. Also, thanks to the volunteers that made today's event possible by gathering the questions, streamlining them, and sending them across. All your efforts are recognized and appreciated. So, with that being said, I would like to wish all of you a good evening, a good morning, good night, and have a great day. I'm Anura Ferdinand signing off, and thank you all again. Have a great day, everybody. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.